Alright, and we are live. Just a little bit of a quick recap from yesterday's stream. We beat the Cleric Beast and Father Gascoigne. Hello, Soda, how's it going? Nice to see you again. And we've just been examining the different items that we've gotten as we've progressed through the game. And just talking about the lore, the mechanics of the game, storytelling in general, and how it applies to Bloodborne. And we're going to be continuing from where we left off yesterday, which is right after killing Father Gascoigne and retrieving the red brooch from Viola. Beating Father Gascoigne gets us the key to Erden's tomb, which allows us access to the chapel beyond it. But before we truly enter the chapel itself, we kind of go through a back route from the sewers into what looks to be a kind of small private library. There's a chest over here which has the blood gem workshop tool. Hey Wenders, how's it going? Oh, Soda's asking who do we think killed Viola? I definitely think it's Father Gascoigne, because FromSoft games really like to dial up the tragedy and make players feel a little bit powerless, and it's just a really good way to characterize Father Gascoigne's life as more of a tragedy, because he became so consumed with the hunt he was unable to recognize even his own wife, which is like alluded to with his daughter saying that her dad will forget their mother without the music box. And since we have the music box, it should be pretty clear that he killed Viola, in my opinion. Yeah, she doesn't have the giant axe wound in her for sure. It's kind of hard to say. Like a lot of the corpses in Bloodborne in general don't really have like a whole lot of gore, and it might be like just blood like that. But she looks like she kind of just died, like Padme in Star Wars. All right, so going back to this library, we have a very interesting note that's got some discrepancies within it. The English says, "The Bergenworth spider hides all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us. A terrible shame. It makes my head shudder uncontrollably." And the Japanese for that is very close. The only difference that's really, I don't really know how to say it, like the nuance of it is hard to understand, that this note is supposed to connect to what's going on in Yahar'gul, because the part where it's talking about hiding all manner of rituals uses the same kind of kanji that is the title for Yahar'gul, the Unseen Village. So it's a foreshadowing that Yahar'gul is a hidden village by Ram, and hiding in this way means it's concealing the Mentis rituals, or all manner of rituals, and they're still ongoing. It's just we don't have the ability to perceive them as they're occurring right now. The only other small difference is like their master isn't necessarily lost. He's unseen or unseeable, invisible. It's a little bit unclear what it means by that. And that could be a reference to Mikolash, because he's in the dream. It could be a reference to Willem, because in some content, like the gatekeeper refers to Willem as being lost, although in all fairness, that version of Willem could have been what became the Mikolash character that we have in the retail version of the game. You also think it's in line with their daughter saying Viola is silly, but perhaps you said so already. She might have tripped and died unironically. It's a hell of a way to go out. I'd say the alternative is that a beast killed Viola and drove Gascoigne mad, but I prefer he kills her. The spider is a poetic way to say influence, yes? Um, could you rephrase that? I don't want to make a poor assumption of what you're trying to ask. The spider is Rom, the vacuous spider. That's why it's the Bergenworth spider. It's not explained how she's hiding these rituals. It could just be part of her existence as a great one. She might not even be trying to consciously do it. It could just be a byproduct of her existence in general. Oh, you think the Bergenworth spider is under Bergenworth control? Possibly. Control could, in like this context, could just mean that they control access to her. It's not explained whether or not Bergenworth is able to influence her actions. Rom sort of hides Yahar'gul, and we'll get to that later, hopefully in this stream. But when we go there, we'll see that the moon will be white and it'll be dark, or maybe we'll even get there while it's still twilight. You assumed it was poetic, but it can also mean Ram. Yeah, she definitely has an influence over there, and I feel like the kanji that talks about hiding rituals in that note in this chapel really highlights that there's the connection between what's going on in Yahar'gul and Ram, and we'll explore more of that once we get to entering this chapel. There's a nice little cutscene to set up the atmosphere. Cathedral Ward pops on our screen. It's a little bit unfortunate they call this Cathedral Ward because for a long time it was really hard for me to remember that Uden Chapel is in Cathedral Ward and it's not like the Uden Chapel tomb warp. I would warp to the wrong place really often. So we can see, like, hanging from the ceiling, we've got urns with incense coming out of it, and all throughout the chapel itself there are stacks of urns. If you break them, you can't really see what's going on in them right now, but they're filled with like the bones of the people that they've cremated. And Bergenworth's web of influence, so to speak. Yeah, definitely spider-related puns are welcome in this stream.
A hunter? Very sorry. The incense must have masked your scent. Good, good. I've been waiting for one of your ilk. These hunts have everyone all locked up inside, waiting for it to end. It always does, always has, you know, since forever. But it won't end nicely, not this time. Even some folks hiding inside are going bad. The screams of women folk, the stench of blood, the snarls of beasts, none of them's too uncommon now. Yharnam's done for, I tell ya. But if you spot anyone with their wits about them, tell them about this here Uden Chapel. They'll be safe here. The incense wards off the beasts. Spread the word. Tell them to come on over, if you wouldn't mind.
I really enjoy the voice actor for the Chapel Dweller. He does a really good job of not quite sounding like pathetic, but like on the line between like pathetic and pleading for help. The nuance in Japanese is like kind of hidden behind honorific, so I feel like the way his lines were acted out kind of makes up for any discrepancies that would occur as far as just like only a text reading would allow for. This is the first indication that the hunt we're experiencing is significantly worse than the other hunts, which is really interesting. Chapel Dweller is so good. Yeah, it's one of the first indications. The other would be, like, of course, it would take context to know all that kind of stuff. Would be Gehrman saying that the moon is close tonight, the note in the dark room in central Yharnam talking about the moonlit night that old Yharnam was burned to the ground. Stuff like that.
I know I shouldn't be asking you, but if you happen upon someone while hunting, tell them about this here Erdon Chapel, if they seem worth being told, that is. Oh, and I do sincerely hope they are. I know if they seem... Oh,
And so this is the first safe place that we can access. He mentioned how he couldn't tell that we had entered because the incense masks our scent. If we actually look up close to him, he's kind of got a really weird face. He doesn't really have proper pupils. They're just kind of all covered in white. His eyes are occluded. Once I get the binocular, it'll be easier to examine that kind of detail. So the chapel is the first safe place that we can send NPCs to. That old lady that was insulting us, calling us useless for not knowing any place safe, we can tell her to come here, as well as another location
Welcome home. What is it?
Yosefka's clinic once we
Very
talk to
well. Let me
the
stand
fake,
close.
which we're just about to do.
Farewell, good heart. May you...
Go back to the first floor sick room. Do I think the chapel dweller is kind of nervous with the way he speaks? In English, yes, definitely. In Japanese, I think he's a bit nervous because the way he talks is very humble, and he definitely places everyone else much higher than him in like the social standing scale. So I think like the way that he internalizes his position makes it so that he doesn't feel worthy to talk to anybody else, which we'll kind of see that come into play a little bit more
Oh,
later.
well, hello. Splendid. Let me ask you a small kindness. You're soon off to hunt, I presume? Then, if you find any survivors, tell them to seek Yosefka's clinic. If they are yet human, I will look after them. Perhaps even cure them. Beasts, they are not to be feared. This time the night is long. I may be trapped here, but I should do something to help. I'll even offer a reward for your cooperation. Tempted? Well, off you go then.
So this set of dialogue should be a hint that not everything is necessarily as it seems. Since we've already talked to the real Yosefka, which many players can easily miss on their first playthrough, or even subsequent playthroughs, the real Yosefka knows that we're a hunter and we're already out on the hunt, but the way that the imposter greets us makes it seem as though she's completely unfamiliar with the hunter. So she still doesn't want anybody to go inside and see the experiments that she's running, and she's trying to deceive the hunter into bringing so-called like normal NPCs over into her clinic, whom she says she'll safeguard and potentially like cure their wounds and treat their illnesses, even the scourge of beasts. However, she's really conducting grotesque experiments which can transform them into alien-like creatures that we call celestial emissaries. Fuck false Yosefka. Don't you speak ill of Herbert and Mia's hero? Yeah, Miyazaki has said in an interview he considers the imposter Yosefka as a heroine within this game. I can understand why if you look at her ultimate objective in trying to save people and raise them above the base level of humanity into something greater. However, like obviously, as humans, we are going to place a lot of value on our own humanity, so we'll kind of um, have a knee-jerk reaction to reject what she's doing, not only because it's like scientifically unethical, but they're literally transforming in what seems to be like monsters or something completely inhuman, and that's just frightening to us on a primal level, that we could be transformed into something completely alien and hard to like empathize or sympathize with in any capacity. Mia just Mia just wants hot choir babies, maybe.
If you find anyone who's still human, send them straight to Yusefka's clinic. You can assure them there's no place safer. Please, do me this service.
And then the other tell that this isn't necessarily the real Yosefka, as she says to take them to Yosefka's clinic, not anything like my clinic or to me, anything like that. That would kind of tie her identity directly into that of like the administrator of the clinic. And if we try to examine her like through the wall, I don't know if the proper angle for it, you can see that now she's holding a weapon. Um, it's really not that big a deal. It's definitely easier with a binocular. And her head will track us, although that's a lot more easily seen if you like sequence break and go on the other side of the door. Um, it could just be like the game developers didn't have enough time to properly develop the real Yosefka character and separate her from the fake one, and that's why the fake one has more animations and things like that, a little bit more tender love and care put into her model. Um, Going back out into Central Yharnam, one thing that I failed to point out before killing Gascoigne was the evening cycle has now progressed a bit more, so the lighting has changed. You can see it's a lot more golden color. The sun is a little bit further set back. It'll be easier once I go up the ladder to show. Oh yes, and the Hippocratic Oath is just a little localization thing to make a familiar concept to Western audiences, but it's in the Japanese. She doesn't really mention Hippocrates or anything like that. It's just that um, she swears as a doctor she will treat and cure patients. So people take that line to occasionally mean this is supposed to be Earth, but that reading isn't necessarily available in the Japanese. And after progressing with our story, we can talk to Gilbert. I should have talked to him after killing the cleric beast the first time, but here we go.
You needn't concern yourself with me. I'm afraid I'm of little help now. But before I take this,
He gives us the flame sprayer.
I made no use of it, but perhaps you. What afflicted me was incurable, but this town gave me hope. Their strange blood bought me time. I was most fortunate, unharmed by the plague of beasts. I can even die human.
So Gilbert's line right there should be a really big clue that some of the claims from the healing church that the blood can heal all ailments and illnesses is not true. He's still very sick. His sickness is progressing over the course of the night, and it should call into question just what blood that they are taking if it doesn't really cure diseases. Like, how did that information get spread? It could just be because it makes people feel lively again, that they believed that it can cure everything, and on maybe other nights when the moon presence wasn't near and wasn't exacerbating the effects of the beasthood within men, and the blood in general, it might be more true that the healing effects of the blood would seem um, less suspicious, so to speak. You think it did cure his disease? Well, we still hear him coughing. We don't really see like Father Gascoigne or Amelia coughing, or like this is suspicious beggar later on. They all seem fairly healthy, so to speak, but they will transform into those grotesque monsters, whereas he continues coughing and getting worse before he transforms into a tiny beast patient. He had the beast sickness and came to Yharnam to cure it, but then Yharnam's blood turned him into a beast. He might have just had a different kind of illness altogether. We're not given that information.
Don't you worry about me. Don't you worry about me.
So, one of the lines that I missed before because I failed to talk to him after the cleric beast was, yes, I see, but the Great Bridge is the only way to the Cathedral Ward, and during the hunt, the bridge is closed. You could try the aqueduct? There's a rather, how shall I put it, colorful area south of the Great Bridge. From there, an aqueduct leads to the Cathedral Ward. Not a place you'd normally want to visit, but I don't imagine you have much of a choice, do you? And then after that, talking to him again, we'll get an aqueduct leads from the town south of the main bridge to the Cathedral Ward. Not a place you normally choose to visit, but not much of a choice with the bridge closed. And of course, like with the door to the Great Bridge closed off, our only way to get to the Cathedral Ward is through the canals and the aqueducts, where we go to see Eileen and kind of where the old lady is. I think it's ambiguous, and he definitely became a hunter in exchange for treatment. Maybe the fact that he says he never used his flame sprayer is a little bit indicative to me that he might not have been a hunter, or at least he definitely didn't act within the capacity of a hunter. And the old lady who berated us before.
So what is it now? Are much better ways to pass the time. Unless you found me a nice safe place.
We could tell her to go to Erden Chapel or Yosefka's clinic. Sending her to the chapel will truly save her for the night, and she'll eventually start giving us sedatives if we continue talking to her later. Sending her to the clinic more or less kind of ends her story arc as a character, and she'll be transformed into one of the grotesque celestial emissaries that we'll see later in the game. He definitely seems involved with the old Yharnam in some capacity. Gilbert, with the flame sprayer, I could see how you could come to that conclusion. I just don't think there's a...
Well, what do you know? An outsider worth a lick of salt. Well, don't just stand there. Don't you have work to do? Go slit some throats. Get this mess done with.
I really like her voice actress
enough with
as
you.
well.
Trot along. Chop, chop.
Chop, chop! The old Yharnam beast could just be a sign that he's afflicted with ashen blood, not necessarily that it's a different kind of like beasthood or beasthood from a different land. It's even though beasthood is inherent within humanity, it takes like the blood of Yharnam
What are
to
you still doing here?
bring it out.
Enough.
And Eileen doesn't say anything different. Her quest won't progress until we go through what do you call it, the Cathedral ward gates and open them. And oh, that was bad. I even meant to go to the other side where that item was, because we didn't come back over here the first time around. I don't really think there's too many important items over here, but just for like completion's sake. Oh god. Do I think the bodies hanging up there were strung up by Eileen? I don't necessarily think that. Like, hanging bodies are just kind of a feature of Yharnam. My thoughts in general on hanged men is that it might have been the original way that like they did, like the Thumerians ended up discovering a kind of old blood, and that by imbibing the blood, oh god, how did I forget about that guy? That imbibing their blood led to their blood becoming more undead in nature, and that's what caused them to become more inhuman as they continued to imbibe that blood and refine that process. Apparently Eileen mentioned something about stringing you up after you attack them and they drop hunter gear. I could look at her dialogue and see what she says after I kill the patrolling guy. Looks like I might only have her dialogue for when she's fighting us in the Grand Cathedral. Oh, okay, I see what you mean. Look at you, you sorry drunk. I'll string you up like the filthy beast you are. You shall not abscond your crimes. Were you not once a hunter? Is this sincerely what you want? That's enough now. No one will blame you. With saying she'll string us up, that's a little bit of just like a difference in translation. The Japanese, which definitely wouldn't translate very well into English, would be she'll be like our assistant in suicide. Like in committing seppuku, they'll have a second person to strike the person who's committing suicide down before they like really feel a ton of pain, and so she's kind of offering herself in that role. Yeah. Yeah, just a bloodstone shard, not a big deal. Yeah, her description on her, is it her, the Blades of Mercy, talks about blasphemous Yharnam burials and using sky burials instead, which is just like literally leaving a corpse strung up to like get devoured by birds and decompose naturally. Yeah, Yharnam burial is just torching people alive, the Crowfeather garb, if you remember correctly. I don't think the Yharnam burial is like a cremation. I think it may have just been like a real burial, but I suppose it's not super clear. more bloodstone shards. And I forgot to mention it before, but like the on the other side, like way up there, when I dropped down and there was another corpse on like the beams spreading across, we got one of the thick cold bloods, level 5, which is a huge jump in quality compared to the 1s and 2s in this area. I forgot to read that description. We'll look at that in a second. Oh, I need to go this way. This guy is carrying the statue. Easy to visceral. Some more blood vials. You saw the burial was more in relation to the beasts. People burn beasts to keep them from respawning or to stop the scourge. Yeah, I think that's a possibility. I wish there was a little bit more information.
Hello, Mr. Hunter.
To let us know.
Still can't find my mum.
So we could give her the red jeweled brooch, but that'll cause her to run away and essentially get killed by the pig where we got the Saw Hunter badge from earlier.
Oh, okay. I can wait. But isn't there something I can do? Maybe Mum and Dad are stuck out there, waiting for me to come and find them. What do you think, Mr. Hunter?
So she wants to go out to town to kind of obviously search for her parents for herself because she's worried about them. With this telling her no and not giving her the brooch of her mother allows us to send her to a safe place, which doesn't really work out in either case. Telling her to go to the chapel will still get her killed by the pig because she wanders out, and we can get a ribbon from her corpse that can be used for a quest line later. Or we could tell her of Yosefka's clinic. We'll lose out on the ribbon, but I think it's a pretty cool conclusion to the quest. This NPC's story isn't terribly important after this point anyway, and it's kind of cool to see the specific item her Celestial Emissary corpse drops.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Mr. Hunter. I love you almost as much as Mum and Dad. And Granddad.
So that line has also piqued a lot of curiosity of the players. Who is Granddad? If Father Gascoigne is her father and Viola is her mother, the most likely conclusion we can draw with that would be it's Henrik, because we already know, well, not through this playthrough at least, we can learn that he's lived a very long life and he was Gascoigne's partner, which is why we'll end up fighting him later on.
Thank you. I love you almost as much.
So that's pretty much all that we in that quest. Since Yharnam is superstitious, they seem to like the kind of people to burn corpses to stop the plague. You hear some flavor dialogue if you wore Gascoigne's garb. Yeah, that'd be cool. Kind of brutal, like, what the hell are you doing with my dad's clothes? Isn't Henrik Viola's daughter? He's more of a close family friend. There's nothing to say that Henrik is... Oh, are you asking if Viola is Henrik's daughter? Yeah, I think that's a pretty good reading. The kanji doesn't really distinguish how that works out, but since he was like Gascoigne's partner, it would seem that way, because for Granddad, it could just be like a term of familiarity and not really mean like that Henrik is her like biological grandfather. It's not something we'll ever really know, unfortunately, but I like to think that he could be Viola's father and the child's biological grandfather. Henrik is black, which kind of makes things weird. And so that's pretty much it for this area. I don't believe I'm forgetting anything. We go back to the dream. I will discuss like the Saw Hunter badge and what that unlocked.
Welcome. What? Very well. Farewell.
Oh, Gammon's back. I thought he was gone for good.
The moon is close. It will be a long hunt tonight. If the beasts loom large and threaten to crush your spirits, seek a holy chalice, as every hunter before you has. A holy chalice will reveal the tomb of the gods, where hunters partake in communion.
So this line of or set of dialogue from Gehrman really interests me. There's some slight discrepancies with it that are I don't really know how to describe it. Like his last few lines about the holy chalice revealing the tomb of the gods, where hunters partake in communion, is repeated verbatim in the Thumerian or Thumeru chalice description. It says, a holy chalice exposes the graves of gods. Its blood becomes the sustenance of hunters. Receive communion in Japanese. In his line and in the chalice description itself. And the way that I interpret that to be would be that the chalices that the hunters use to open the tombs of the gods is what they partake communion from. And what we use to open the chalice dungeons themselves is ritual blood, which we'll find later on. And from that conclusion, I would say that hunters partake in ritual blood. And ritual blood might not be different from cold blood because it's described as being incoagulable, which means like it doesn't clot when it's cold or found in a dead body. But we'll explore a little bit more of that later.
Most of the holy chalices lie deep within the tomb of the gods, and the few that found their way to the surface were lost again in the hands of men. But if the old hunter tales remain true, one of the holy chalices is worshipped in the valley hamlet. Yet the town is in disarray. It was burned and abandoned for fear of the scourge. Home now only to beasts. The perfect place for a hunter, wouldn't you say?
So, when he says nitpick, but when he says every hunter, do you think he specifically refers to hunters who visited the hunter's dream? Possibly. I think there's definitely a group of like tomb prospectors, which is essentially a fancy way of saying grave robbers, who went into the chalices, like physical locations, to originally like plunder the Thumerian ruins. But I think the ones who used the chalices were most likely like dreaming hunters. But of course that's a little bit ambiguous because when we go into the chalices themselves, we can find some random like healing church hunters as well as a vile blood hunter. So it's I think in certain aspects left up to fans to decide what they believe in on that front. The only hunters that actually operate are part of the dream now anyways. I don't think we visit the actual places in the chalices. Yeah, it's something that I wish there was a little bit more clarification about. The way that I like to interpret it, and you know, this you can just take it or leave it, would be that they're more like either dream-like representations of the physical locations, but I don't believe that the hunter physically goes into the chalices, partially just because it helps like explain what's going on with the root chalices and how their shapes can change every time they're accessed. But the chalices feel a bit more like we're reliving the memories of the tomb prospectors, potentially. And to go back to Wender's comment about every hunter, the line in Japanese is closer to like many. It's something many hunters did in the past. So he's not trying to like literally say every hunter who ever lived went through the chalices. It's just something that some did, potentially to gain more strength from the blood and like the blood echoes that they get from down there. And within his last set of lines, he talks about the valley hamlet down below. That's a reference to Old Yharnam, obviously, because the town was burned down and underwent that tragedy. Or we're experiencing a sort of metaphysical transportation since Lorian and Eyes clearly aren't where Thumaru is. One of the Eyes Chalice descriptions mentions that like it's a secret part of the Thumerian dungeons to some degree. I'd need to like double check it to confirm, but it's food for thought. That Eyes could have been like a subsection of Thumaru, perhaps something like equivalent to how the Healing Church has the School of Mensis or the Choir. Eyes is also said to be close to the cosmos in one of the descriptions, yeah. So yeah, Garman's essential tips for us right now is to go to Old Yharnam to advance the story, and that makes sense because unless we have the Hunter Chief emblem, we can't go to the Cathedral Ward anyway. So essentially our only way to advance the story without like 10,000 echoes and buying the item is to go through Old Yharnam.
One of the holy chalices is worshipped in the Valley Hamlet, a town of beasts, the perfect place for a hunter.
And of course, telling us to go to the hamlet to gain a chalice, just a more removed way to guide the player where they need to go. So now that the inside shop has been unlocked, we can purchase Gascoigne set as well as some consumables, the small resonant bell. It's a small bell discovered in the old underground labyrinth. Its ring resonates across worlds, and the first hunter used it as a special signal to call hunters from other worlds to cross the gap and cooperate. This bell resonates with its counterpart, the beckoning bell, ring to help hunters in other worlds. It's an online use only item. So this is one of the bells that kind of links the concept of other worlds and hunters from other worlds into the narrative of the game. So certain things which don't make a whole lot of sense can be hand wave explained away by saying, oh, it's a hunter from another world. Like if we get Henrik as a cooperator by using the old hunter bell, it's only possible for us to do so once we've killed Henrik with Eileen in the waking world, which doesn't make a lot of sense realistically. There's also the possibility that the Henrik we summon for that could be our version of Henrik, and we're just summoning like his memory from the nightmare, and it's like his spirit form, kind of like when we fight in the Nightmare of Mensis versus accessing it through his mummified body. Okay. And Gascoigne set. Hunter attire worn by Father Gascoigne. Similar to hunter garb created at the workshop, only these are tainted by a pungent, beastly stench that eats away at Gascoigne. Father is a title used for clerics in a holy land, and there is no such rank in the Healing Church. And most of the descriptions are the same. His garb is slightly different, stating that the dingy scarf is a holy shawl and symbol of the Healing Church, from which Gascoigne would eventually part ways. So this reveals that Gascoigne is or was a foreigner, and he did have some affiliation with the Healing Church, and what identifies him to other members of the Healing Church is the shawl on his garb. It's not necessarily the garb itself, it's the shawl, which is kind of a staple of Healing Church uniform designs. and we'll see a bit more of those later. I'm gonna save up most of my insight for this run, just to show off some interesting things, but I'm gonna get the chest right now for one of the quest lines that we'll do later. You always thought Thumaru was a mix of civilizations, to be honest, but the Thumerian society was different, and we summoned Henrik from a different time. Time is convoluted, so we're summoning him from an earlier time. Unfortunately, with like Bloodborne, the whole idea of time being convoluted isn't as set up as it is in Dark Souls. I think you could make arguments that the time isn't convoluted in Bloodborne, and it's only like the hunter's experience of being able to relive the night of the hunt that would allow for that kind of idea. But just like in general, like we don't necessarily have heroes from ages past coming back to the present. Like we see Eileen and like Ludwig and things like that, but they're not the active dreaming hunter. They're just kind of doing their own thing, having already participated in their version of the hunt and continued on with their lives. And so after getting the Saw Hunter badge, it unlocks a few more items from the workshop, or the messenger bath. I think the throwing knives were new. We've already looked at those. Maybe the pebbles. But it does unlock the other starting items for us, which I forgot to look at when I was first looking at the items. So the saw cleaver is one of the trick weapons of the workshop, commonly used in the hunting business. This saw, effective at drawing the blood of beasts, transforms into a long cleaver that makes use of centrifugal force. The saw, with its set of bloodletting teeth, has become a symbol of the hunt and only grows in effectiveness the more grotesquely transformed the beast. The saw spear. I don't think I looked at this when we got it. We can pick one up in the aqueduct, but also getting the Saw Hunter badge unlocks it. One of the trick weapons in the workshop, commonly used by those who dedicate themselves to the hunt. This saw, effective at drawing the blood of beasts, transforms into a medium-range spear. The saw, with its set of bloodletting teeth, has become a symbol of the hunt, and only grows in effectiveness the more grotesquely transformed the beast. So it does share a little bit in common with the saw cleaver, but it's slightly different. It's more of like the skill build version of the saw cleaver for the most part. A lot of people really like that item. The hunter axe is one of the trick weapons of the workshop, commonly used on the hunt. Retains the qualities of an axe, but offers a wider palette of attacks by transforming. Boasts a heavy, blunt attack leading to a high rally potential. No matter their past, beasts are no more than beasts. Some choose this axe to play the part of executioner. So one of the bigger discrepancies within like the descriptions would be in the hunting axe. Instead of saying like beasts are no more than beasts, the Japanese very clearly states the beasts are no longer human. And that's a pretty like blunt way of stating that the beasts were humans, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who knows anything about werewolves. But it's like in the English version, the reveal of Gascoigne is a little bit more shocking if for some reason you weren't expecting such a transformation or that people were the beasts. I don't think there is anything particularly different about the cleaver, the spear, or anything like that. The other minor thing would be that the hunter axe uses like blunt damage to deal its damage, as opposed to like serrated. And just goes back into how there's different types of damage in Bloodborne. But it doesn't necessarily mean that having a blunt attack gives more rally potential. Like, that's just a specific characteristic of this weapon. can we agree that Kirk Hammer is the coolest sounding anything? Maybe? I don't know. I do like the Kirk Hammer as a localization. I think it's just called like Church Hammer when looked at literally in Japanese. I don't remember if I looked at this or not. I'm just going to assume I didn't. So the Hunter pistol is made at the workshop for hunter stalking beasts. Hunter firearms are especially crafted to employ quicksilver bullets fused with the wielder's own blood, boosting damage against beasts. It's a quicker draw than their blunderbuss, allowing for speedier responses to attacks. I don't necessarily know if that last line is true. I'm sure like the data miners could give the specifics. I don't really find too much of a difference. The pistol does a little bit more like direct damage and is useful for like maybe dealing a little extra specific damage to like the cleric beast's head, but like beyond that, I really don't find too much of a difference that would really be worth talking about. We already talked about the Yharnam set, and those are all the new items given to us through having the Saw Hunter badge. And I didn't talk about this before, so it's a badge crafted long ago at the workshop, attests to one's prowess as a hunter of beasts. The workshop is gone and no group recognizes this meaningless badge except the messengers in the bath who understand its profundity. Certain things can only be entrusted with a hunter in possession of this badge, or so they believe. Profundity means like profoundness, so the messengers understand the nature behind the Saw Hunter badge, which is why they're able to offer us new items, as it like represents proof of our being a certain caliber of hunter and being able to have the right to access those items, so to speak. Strength weapons have the highest rally potentials in the game. You think the Burial Blade has the highest rally potential? Isn't it strength? No, skill mainly. Yeah, I'm sure we could like look up at the stats within the data mined from within the game to figure out for sure. We've also got some runes that can help us boost that potential later on. What we got from the box in the chapel says it's the blood gem workshop tool. It's a misplaced workshop tool from the hunter's dream. The hunter who retrieves this can fortify weapons by kneading blood gems into them. Blood gems add properties to weapons when used to fortify them, as blood defines an organism. That line is very interesting. I haven't really found too much beyond just kind of what it says at a surface level about blood defining the organism. It's pretty straightforward, but very cryptic nonetheless. You think the blunderbuss is better since you can miss with the pistol pretty frequently? Yeah, maybe. It's still possible to miss with the blunderbuss, especially if something's like right in your face. And the red jeweled brooch talks about how it was a woman's red jeweled brooch engraved with the name Viola, which identifies the woman on the roof as being the little girl's mother. Perhaps the jewel is a gift from a hunter, used to change into a droplet blood gem that fortifies any weapon. With a proper workshop tool, various weapons can be fortified. So of course this is like hinting to us that we cannot use this item until we get what was in the chapel. One of the lost hunter tools that Gehrman had originally been talking about. And we can literally use this item as a consumable to get the red blood gem. The red blood gem is a blood gem that fortifies weapons and adds various properties. Droplet blood gems are special gems that adapt to various weapons and shapes. Created from a bright red brooch, this blood gem strengthens the effect of rallying. A quintessential hunter skill, rallying symbolizes the battle-worn hunter who is often the only thing standing after a bloodbath. I don't remember if the Japanese differs in any like significant way. I don't think it does. But it just goes to kind of characterize like rallying is a quintessential technique that hunters must utilize when out on the hunt, and it just adds back into that ludo narrative of the game where like to a random observer, like the most proficient hunters who would rally to the maximum effect that they could would almost appear to be like indistinguishable to someone who's gone blood drunk and is just fueled with rage and killing and things like that. So it's a symbol of only the hunter standing after a battle to the death, and that concept of battling to the death or fights to the death is something that Miyazaki said he really wanted to convey to his players of the game, and I think it does do a good job in that regard. Like the amount of joy people have after defeating a boss that they've been stuck on for ages is probably one of like the best highs you can get within like modern gaming, in my opinion. Doing everything everywhere else. The idea of going blood drunk is just the devs congratulating themselves for making a great combat system. I really do enjoy Bloodborne's combat system. Like transitioning from Bloodborne to like Dark Souls 3 really makes me miss the rally mechanic. Like once you get used to having it, it almost becomes second nature, and it really eases out the experience of the game. It's just a little bit unfortunate that it's a little bit hard to understand, especially on initial plays. Like it's very obvious when a player is a skilled Bloodborne player versus a newbie, because you'll see like the more skilled players immediately trying to maximize their rally potential, healing less with the blood vials, being more aggressive, whereas newer players tend to be a bit more passive and rely on the healing purely from the blood vials. Honestly, Dark Souls combat is pretty rough when you've gone to Bloodborne. I agree. Especially 3 since it's so similar, but so not. Yeah, I agree with that too. Um, After playing Bloodborne, I couldn't even play Dark Souls 2 just because it's so much slower. But I really don't have issues going from Bloodborne to Dark Souls 1 for some reason. It's just because they're probably so different, and also like with Dark Souls, you've got shields, which really kind of make the game ridiculously easy in comparison, I think.
Oh no, I haven't forgotten. Do you think I owe you something? Well, that's a fine lark, I'd say. This whole mess that Yharnam's in is all your fault. Stupidity outsiders. Our blood's ruined, tainted by your ilk. Don't you come near me. I know your type.
I just really love like the voice actress for this old lady. She just sounds so crotchety and perfect for her role. You think the new players don't realize they can transform the weapons in the midst of fighting, and the L2 on the two-handed weapons for juicy crowd control. That's true. It's also like one of the features of Bloodborne that I've like kind of discovered is you can pretty much just stun lock most enemies with R1 spam with a lot of weapons. So it's kind of like the bread and butter of the combat system. So for a lot of people, there's no real need to branch out and try those combos, especially because like it's not very intuitive, especially coming from like Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 2, just because you think you're stuck in a certain animation loop, so why would you bother pressing something else in the middle of that? Like that's going to get you hit. Like you're conditioned to not try those patterns until you get to a game like Bloodborne with its trick weapons.
You! Stay away from me! I know all your tricks.
Damn, we've been discovered. Found out. All our tricks.
Ah, the hunter. Thank you. So that old girl, you told her about this place, right? Well, she don't offer me much in the way of conversation, but still, I'd rather see her alive anyhow.
We get an emote or
If you
gesture.
find any sane survivors, well, send them along to Erdon Chapel, will ya? If you find any...
Yeah, you prefer to do the combos because they're flashy as hell. Yeah, they're nice for sure. Certain weapons are of course like a lot better suited to it. Forgot, can't stun lock these guys. So this dude, he is most certainly not a beast. I'll just get the monocular before I examine them up close, because it's right over here. Where's the other guy? Did he already go? Yeah, probably. And this is a gigantic church servant. Unfortunately, they cannot be parried. You can break like the little bone that's coming out of their legs to initiate the opportunity to get a visceral attack. I think it's a little bit harder to do with the cane, especially if you're like locked on like this. And of course, like the old Dark Souls technique or Soulsborne in general of just sticking to big ol' enemy's butt is always effective. So going for that booty. You think using like the combat tricks makes you look better at the game than you actually are? Yeah, I can definitely feel that. Another gigantic huntsman's minion using the statue to smack faces with. I don't know why, but that just entertains me so much. This dude, he's got a whole bunch of like crows around him that are pretty easy to miss. And so if you try to go to a visceral, sometimes you'll just get interrupted rudely. So it's always good to pay attention to your surroundings. And once you get that visceral off, you get those iframes. I like the cane for dealing with the crows just because you don't have to deal with half their shit. It's really good tracking for them compared to some of the other weapons. And this guy over here has got the best item for the lore playthroughs, of course, monocular. If I remember what items to, or what buttons to press, we could equip it. So the monocular is used to view things up close. Not a hunter's tool, but a simple antique to be used as one sees fit. Monocular it's pretty self-explanatory. Binocular is for 2 eyes, and monocular is for 1 eye. So it's essentially a telescope under a different name. Yeah, you think the threaded cane is great for crowd control too? Has great synergy with the Blades of Mercy. Yeah, I agree. Helps that they're both skill weapons. I like the threaded cane mostly for the untransformed form of it, just because the R1 spam is a lot faster than normal. So this is how the monocular works. We can see that's like Jura's Tower and Old Yharnam. That's the bridge leading towards Gascoigne's area, where that like flaming ball of hay or whatever it is can go down. Your sewer's over there. That's the Great Bridge over there. The sun is like in a completely different position because like when you're over by the first lantern, you see it over there. Probably development oversight. Different skybox. It's unclear. Should probably ask Lance about it just for the hell of it. Before I forget, because I keep forgetting, let's just examine one of the thick cold bloods. Just to compare it to the regular cold blood do. That one's a 3. You see, like, on the icon, the base version is normal, and then as you go and progress, you get more like white little specks coming out of it, which I interpret to be the blood echoes. And so the thick cold blood says it's a thick droplet of cold blood containing blood echoes, used to gain a larger amount of blood echoes. A strong will produces thick blood, doubtless the product of obsession, a potent source of human strength. Now, I don't think like calling it thick cold blood is a poor translation by any means. My only gripe would be with it would be that it's very easy to confuse the idea of thick cold blood as being like a literal kind of thickness, whereas in Japanese it more means like it's rich or dense, filled with like the blood echoes. So some people think like, oh, as you get more like blood echoes, your blood literally gets thicker, when I don't necessarily think that's the case, especially since like cold blood is described as being incoagulable to begin with. If anything, it would make it like stay more liquidy and less solid, in my opinion at least. There's another line with the thick cold blood about like it being the product of obsession, and that idea of obsession is something that people can use to support their own strength. It ties into the concept of using like blood echoes to sustain our willpower and things like that. So the idea of obsession and willpower are intertwined within Bloodborne, and that's one of the hidden themes I think in relation to like the blood and the psyche and things in general along those lines. You think it has a more decadent undertone? Sorry, which has the more decadent undertone? Like the rich blood, as opposed to thick blood? Some more shards, which are always nice this early on in the game. And this is another church servant, although he's got like a gigantic cannonball looking like thing attached to a chain. And beyond him is a wandering madness. I don't know if I already triggered it. Whatever, let's just YOLO and go for it if it's... Alright. Oh, I missed. It's hard to deal damage to them so early. Oh great, he didn't run at me. Get him out of the fence line. Some more space. Oh, he got me. Oh no. I'm out of stamina. Whew. Some more blood vials. I should have healed before picking those up. And so, this is called a Wandering Madness. I'll try to show it off after I pick it up. Some more bloodstone shards. They will always drop bloodstone shards and bloodstone gems, which leads me to believe that they have a connection to the blood and gems. Like, they're probably filled with cold blood or like the old blood to some degree, and we can see like these skulls popping out, like trying to control like one organism, and it moves around, like it scurries so disjointedly. It seems like all these spirits are trying to fight for control over whatever this organism is. They're called wandering madnesses or wandering nightmares because they are connected to the nightmares and madness in general. The idea of madness and it connecting to insight and nightmares in general is something that you think people in real life had strong religious belief which led to deception for years. Oh, people are you think it's reinforcing the status of blood as more of something like water in Yharnam and why people are so reluctant to see through the church's lies. That's when the Wenders talked about deception. What's my explanation for the giant church guys? It's really difficult for me to pinpoint. I have a strong feeling they were experimented on and used as slaves, but shrug. Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a mystery, isn't it? Internally, they're called like undead Frankensteins, or like Frankenstein's monster. So they're also called like flesh golems, which suggests like they took different body parts to construct these kind of grotesque creatures. Um, the fact that they can drop some blue elixirs leads me to believe they may have been experimented on, like maybe normal Yharnamites. And I'll talk about the church servants again in a second, the smaller ones. But the large ones may have been taken from below in Thumaru, although it's unclear how the church controls them. They might just attack whatever they see aggressively. One of like the bestiary descriptions on the Bloodborne official site talks about how the church giants wear the giant bells to warn the Yharnamites to stay closed up and that the hunt was occurring. So it could be they just attack things fairly indiscriminately, although I don't exactly know why they would want to keep such dangerous things around in the Cathedral ward especially. They might have had a certain way to tranquilize and like keep them fairly well pacified. We don't know. So this door cannot be opened. Partially, as Lance McDonald revealed, was due to like hardware limitations of the PS4 when they were originally developing the game. Couldn't allow them to load in Central Yharnam fast enough from this location. And one of the favorite things he likes to show off is when you're in this location and load out and load back in, it'll show that we're loading into the Cathedral Ward map, implying we're not in Cathedral Ward at this point of the level. And that door goes to where the cleric beast fought us on the Great Bridge. So it's a little bit of a shame that we didn't get that option, because it really would have opened up the different ways one could progress through the game if you could like skip Gascoigne to go to Cathedral Ward instead. Oh. And it'll come up right about here. Yep. Cathedral Ward. Showing us that we were originally, well, down there where that bridge is. That's the Great Bridge. You can see a FromSoft standard with the giants being treated like shit. Yeah, it's definitely a theme. Wonder if Miyazaki has like a Napoleon complex or something like that. What if they're creating using the corpses of Thumerians? Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. Like, grave robbing is a huge thing within Bloodborne, so it wouldn't be any surprise to me if they were constructed from that. But since it was something that's already in Thumaru and like the Intertomb chalices, it makes me think like they took that idea from the Thumerians. If not, they just took them from Thumaru to begin with. So on this gate we have a symbol, and this represents the communion of the Old Blood. And that's what's also on the Hunter Chief emblem. Oh, yeah, it's in the item shop because I haven't bought it yet. So yeah, the emblem on, or the symbol on the emblem matches up with what's on this gate. And if we have 50 points of insight, we can see there's like a little lever over there. And right now we don't really see anything going on with it. And we have to have the emblem to open the main gate. But once we have 50 insight, we could see what allows the gate to open is actually just a bunch of messengers who will pull the lever once we hold up the symbol. And for some more environmental things about Cathedral Ward, we've got these statues here chilling. A little bit more logical placement, but like they're still kind of weird. Hanging up from like the buildings, we have incense burners. So the smoke coming out of it is made from like the cremated remains of people. In the archways, there's nothing that I found that's like super significant about like the iconography which appears on them. Second guy should be down here, I think, now. Yeah. So these guys, they hold these lanterns, and if you have 15 insight, they will have eyes on them, and they'll begin to use like more arcane spell type attacks, which is something I find to be very interesting. Examining their faces, they've got completely black eyes, like maybe silver irises, a completely pale white skin as though like their bodies are drained of blood, or as though they're completely undead vampire looking like things. They've got these bells around their neck and like these necklaces which are a little bit hard to make out. So it just ties one of the concepts of like bells being important to the healing church and the idea of like the undead and traversing worlds and things like that. They excavated ancient Thumerians and used their bodies and mishmashed them for whatever purpose. They were controlled using blue elixir. They get your ass kicked by Amelia team. Yeah, I do think blue elixirs may have a role to play in getting like either phantasms in people or the production of the church giants or the church servants. I should have pointed it out before I did that, but at the top right of my screen there's like this little eyeball icon that represents our insight, and after getting grabbed by this mysterious invisible force, which we can vaguely make the outlines of when we get grabbed, it increased our insight level once we got frenzied. But that'll only happen the first time you encounter it, because we are coming into contact with the supernatural, and the sudden influx of like the arcane energy from what grabbed us, it stimulated our mind in such a way that we went crazy and took enough damage to like deal like 70% of our HP. It's like a brain explosion essentially, like both metaphorically and a little bit figurative or literally. And we're going this way because we can't go through the Cathedral ward. That one gate was locked. So the only way to progress right now is going to Old Yharnam. Although, like, it's definitely not clear for players. You're just kind of left to explore for yourself and figure it out. And we had some Yharnamites just kind of crowding around a fire, gathering warmth. Their dogs are what attack us. Did you already mention the death to the minister quote from these enemies? I don't think I have, not that one specifically. It's a bit unclear whether or not the Yharnamites were truly rebelling against the healing church after like being abandoned by them. There's a little like on the wooden shield there's a line in Japanese which could be read as though like the common Yharnamites are revolting against beast hunting, but it's really ambiguous. And like so the line about like death to the minister, it might have been something more important in like the alpha version of the story and it just wasn't taken out, or it could just be a sign to show that the common Yharnamite is starting to get pretty well fed up with the healing church and This might tie into some of the like NPC dialogue that we'll get from like behind one of the locked doors later. What's the symbolism of drawing quicksilver bullets from your left leg and gaining blood from your right? You hold your firearms in your left arm, so that's where you want your bullets to be, I suppose. And I don't necessarily know if there's a certain amount of symbolism that goes behind all that. There's a possibility that there's something called like the left-hand path, that things associated with the left hand or the sinister hand have more ties to sinister, dark magic or things of the occult and the taboo. And so the left hand in general within FromSoft games might be used as a representation of that idea, that like things like magic and quicksilver and mercury might be more tied to that kind of idea, and the right is a little bit more of like the proper path, but that's not really emphasized super strongly. That could just be subtextual information, and it might not even be truly intended on the part of the developers. It could just be a coincidence, really. Death of the Minister is a good album name. I agree. This person right here is Alfred. He is an executioner, and that's not an empty title. He's not like one of those big dudes who wear black. He is part of a certain group, faction of the Healing Church, which takes hunters and uses them in their like secret strong arm of the Healing Church.
You're a beast hunter, aren't you? I knew it. That's precisely how I started out. Oh, beg pardon. You may call me Alfred, protege of Master Ligarius, hunter of vile bloods. So, just what is the meaning of this? Why turn your blade on me?
Maybe he didn't get too pissed off. That's what I get for like setting my controller down.
You're a beast hunter, aren't you? I knew it. That's precisely how I started out. Oh, beg pardon. Protege of Master... So, what say you? Our prey might differ, but we are hunters, the both of us. Why not cooperate and discuss the things we've learned?
So, aside from shooting him in the face, one of the more interesting aspects of Alfred's line in Japanese is that rather than just saying like he's the protege of Master Ligarius, he says more literally that he follows the teachings of Master Ligarius. And so I think that gives him a little bit more distance from Ligarius within the Japanese text, because when in English, if we say like we're the protege of somebody, it sounds like they're a direct mentor to us, like we have a more personal relationship with that person. So I take it that like if he's just following the teachings of Ligarius, he might not have that personal connection that might come across a little bit more strongly within English. It may allow us to give a bit more skepticism to Alfred's motives and claims later on, because Alfred is a very friendly person. He uses a Solaris voice actor, so a lot of people are going to automatically have a liking to him, to trust him, because Solaris is like one of the most reliable and dependable NPCs within Dark Souls. So there's kind of like a subconscious want to like this character to begin with. He offers us information. He says that he was a hunter like us, so he was a senior to us. He is our own kind of mentor. He's one of the very few NPCs who doesn't treat us with hostility, but friendship and camaraderie, which is very attractive in this kind of not necessarily post-apocalyptic world, but definitely one on the brink of it. The revelation of understanding that Alfred has probably never even met Ligarius is incredible. Man, Alfred takes getting shot in the face with a shotgun like a champ. It helps that the bullets are not solid, I suppose. Alfred is a tad insane, though, yes. He's still a good boy, in your opinion. Yeah, if you just look past all the murder. Although I suppose, who the hell am I to judge? I just murdered Gascoigne to get past him. But it was self-defense, I swear. Those dogs, self-defense too. as well as the NPCs later.
Very good. Very good indeed. Take this to celebrate our acquaintance.
Oodles.
Beast hunting is a sacred practice. May the good blood guide your way.
It's the one takeaway that I always get from Alfred's English dialogue, just oodles to share.
There must be oodles for us to share. Go on. Just tell me what piques your interest.
Talk about the healing church, of course. It's interesting that we already seem to know about Bergenworth, because we haven't like interacted with Lawrence's skull or anything like that to even indicate that we have any knowledge of Bergenworth whatsoever. So it seems like the hunter had some knowledge of Yharnam to some degree. So
As
I wish
you
we
know,
knew more about
the
that.
healing church is the fountainhead of blood healing. Well, I'm a simple hunter, quite unfamiliar with the ins and outs of the institution, but I have heard that the holy medium of blood healing is venerated in the main cathedral, and that councillors of the old church reside in the high stratum of the cathedral ward. If you seek blood healing, and the church is willing, you should pay them a visit.
And so, with Gilbert's first suggestion for us to come to Cathedral Ward to go to the healing church to find more about pale blood, we finally get more of a clue as to how to progress with that quest. Alfred tells us that the healing church knows more about the intricacies of blood healing, and that even though he's a hunter, he's not super familiar with the details of the ins and outs of the institution, which may also lend support into casting Alfred as a bit of an unreliable character. His knowledge is incomplete even though he admits to it, and he might just be more or less posing as someone who's closer to the executioners than someone who is actually an executioner. We don't know for sure, but I think there's a good case to make for that kind of reading. And so I think like these kind of discussions like deepen my appreciation for how different interpretations could be valid and arguable, and they don't necessarily have to reconcile with each other. I think both are valid on their own, if that makes sense. You wonder how old Alfred is, same with a lot of the other NPCs. You'd love to know how old Jura is. Alfred looks pretty young compared to a lot of the other NPCs, like on Meph's Bloodborne wiki, I believe. You can go to the face slider page, and despite like looking at like the little age slider, you can just kind of look at each NPC's face up close and compare them. Some of the NPC's faces will change on their quests, like Ariana will become a bit more pale, and her hair will also become more pale as her quest progresses and she becomes more ill, so to speak. So there's some pretty good environmental storytelling within that department as well. But also, it's important to note that like even with our character, we could already become old, like extremely old as far as like the age slider goes, before we become a hunter. So it's not as though hunters are necessarily exclusively recruited from young people. But of course, like the younger the person, the less likelihood that they're an old, like a literally old hunter, not like the term old hunter. A good analogy I like to make with Alfred is like one of those rednecks that still live the Confederacy even though it's been 150 years since the Civil War. Yeah, I can definitely see the parallels there. Solaire is technically a Warrior of Sunlight fanboy rather than an official one, so Alfred being an Executioner fanboy as opposed to a proper one would make thematic sense, I think. You know, that's a really good connection, and I didn't really think about it that way. Thank you for bringing that up. Before I forget, with Alfred's line right there, there was something important. Oh, right, the holy medium of blood healing is venerated in the main cathedral. The Japanese for that line is a bit more explicit. Like a lot of people don't, or will like misinterpret that line, I would argue, and think that it could be a reference to Ebrietas, who's beneath the chapel or the cathedral as like the ultimate source of the like of the blood. They take Alfred's dialogue here as supporting evidence for it.
As you know, well, I'm a simple hunt, but I have heard that the holy medium of blood healing is venerated in the main cathedral.
And just based off that line alone as it is, I can understand how someone can come to that interpretation. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on like what you choose to believe, the Japanese does say that like for blood ministration, I've heard the holy body it originates from is enshrined within the Grand Cathedral. And to me, this should be a clear indication that he's talking about the body of Lawrence because it is shrined within the cathedral itself. And the concept of communion, and it literally comes from the term associated with communion in Catholicism and the Eucharist, which is like the story of treating the body of Jesus as like blood and wine, which people will eat and consume. So the symbolism behind that is partaking in communion and drinking the wine and the bread of the church is the equivalent of drinking the blood of Jesus and eating the body of Jesus. So for the Healing Church, Lawrence is like a Jesus figure, and once we get inside the Healing Church, I can explain how some of the statues that are included in the game have like borrowed from real life statues from Catholicism to kind of evoke those types of connections. You don't really like Ebrietas being the Great One's blood? Well, fortunately for you, I completely disagree with that interpretation, so we'll definitely talk about that more later.
Byrgenwerth is an old place of learning, and the Tomb of the Gods, carved out below Yharnam, should be familiar to every hunter. Well, once a group of young Byrgenwerth scholars discovered a holy medium deep within the tomb. This led to the founding of the Healing Church and the establishment of blood healing. In this sense, everything sacred in Yharnam can be traced back to Byrgenwerth. But today, the college lies deep within a tangled wood, abandoned and decrepit. And furthermore, the Healing Church has declared Byrgenwerth forbidden ground. It's unclear how many of its scholars remain alive, but only they know the password that allows passage through the gate.
And despite me more or less ragging on Alfred's role as being a knowledgeable character, he really does give the player a lot of useful information, a lot of background information, which does seem to check out here, which does make arguments that, oh, he might not have been a true executioner a little bit weaker in my opinion, but I think there's always a good amount of misinformation that could be a product of true information that gets spread. Sorry, I phrased that really poorly. I'm just kind of failing to articulate my thoughts properly, but it really makes things more ambiguous and more arguable in either direction, which I appreciate, even if it can be a little bit frustrating at times. Ebrietas literally goes hostile when you attack her. I don't see how the Healing Church would be able to take gallons and gallons of her blood. I agree with that.
I bid you farewell. It has been a pleasure. May the good blood guide your way.
I also would point out, we don't really see, medical equipment down there that would show signs of harvesting her blood, or, a system to, move any blood that was harvested from her. It's a pretty sketchy interpretation, in my opinion, but we'll explore a bit more of that later. The last thing that I want to talk about with Alfred's dialogue is his leaving line.
There must be... Go on.
Oodles.
I bid you farewell. It has been a pleasure. May the good blood guide your way.
So may the good blood guide your way. It's a really good line in terms of, characterizing Alfred and, the idea of camaraderie between the two of you in something that's a little less, formal, I think. But I think one of the tragedies with saying, "Hey, may the good blood guide your way," is it more or less cements interpretations that there are different kinds of blood, like vile blood and good blood, like healing blood, old blood. Whereas I would argue they're all essentially the same thing with some minor differences in how they're composed. And it becomes harder to like divorce the idea that it's all essentially the same thing. And that's pretty much all I have to say about Alfred for this point. Before I go, I just want to examine where he's standing. We see a statue with a hood on it, which is most likely representative of the gold Ardeo, like the little pyramid looking like headpiece that executioners wear. It almost looks like there's a bell in the hand, although it's really hard to make out. But it's got a bit of a humble and almost like official adjudicating positioning in terms of like its hands and things like that. It could be representative of justice in that it's blind, but when we complete Alfred's quest, he'll also come over here and kill himself if we don't fight him along the way. He gave us fire paper earlier. We should examine that. Fire paper is coarse paper that applies fire to weapons when rubbed. A hunter tool found in the Healing Church's workshop. Since the tragedy that struck old Yharnam, fire has become a staple in beast hunts and is thought to cleanse impurity. Certain types of beasts have an abnormal fear of flame. A lot of this information is a bit redundant. The only like notable thing, which I think is a little bit self-evident here, would be the fire paper. The idea that it's paper might be that it's similar to a kind of sandpaper. Like in Japanese, it's called a file. Like the idea that you rub it and the friction will allow the properties to be imbued upon the weapon is kind of what's behind it. It's a pretty interesting item. It allows, obviously, our weapons to be coated in flame. So we get two madmen's knowledges. We could tell that this corpse belongs to a member of the church. It's prostrated. I don't necessarily think that's important because this is kind of reused asset. They really don't have a whole lot of corpse assets, but it's wearing the black church set and it has like the holy shawl that I talked about in relation to Gascoigne. Flipping that lever from earlier caused this like a, I don't know what to call it, like not a whole mausoleum, but like this tomb thing to move. We got some more of the statues that we can find in Thumaru, as well as all around Yharnam in here. It's not entirely clear what they represent. I think it could be a representation of like the moon presence to a certain degree. It's a little hard to explain that without like looking at the concept art to kind of compare them to, but I'll just say that, leave it as food for thought for now. The room below is fairly empty, just some more statues, and this motif, which kind of gets reused often. I don't necessarily think there's like a whole lot going on with that though. You have a dark room, and if you're not paying attention, this scourge beast can really mess people up when they're caught unaware. It does help that I have the hand lantern, just to kind of show how effective it is. My brightness is also a little bit high, but oh well, I can't see if it's too dark. And then we get a staircase coming down and broken in places. One of the items that's really easy to miss is this set of antidotes right here. They'll be useful when fighting the boss of the next area. It's a little bit of a narrative hint that where we're going to either need antidotes or they're part of the storytelling. And once we get into Old Yharnam itself, we'll see a lot of beasts who've been inflicted by the Ashen Blood, which is synonymous with poison. I think it's implying vile bloods, fear the old blood, that there's good blood and bad blood. They're just semantics that trick people into thinking blood is different when everyone is born from blood anyways. Yeah, a little bit. I know sometimes it can seem like really nitpicky looking at like the semantics of things like this, and for the most part, I can definitely see why people would think they're minor. But I think like you can get a lot of information even from just like semantics, and they can help reinforce or deconstruct certain interpretations of the game. So right now we can hear the doll snoring. That's why there's like this little dark effect at the bottom of the screen. It shows like dialogue is ongoing, although it's not entirely obvious. In the Japanese, like her snoring will be represented with like the equivalent of ZZZ, like this onomatopoeia for sleeping, and it'll go away after a second.
Ah, welcome home, good hunter. I must have drifted off. What is it you desire? Over time, countless hunters have visited this dream. The graves here stand in their memory. It all seems so long ago now. Over time, it all seems...
So we talked about this a little bit on the last stream, like how the graves represent the old hunters and how even like how many there are over in like this enclosed area, as well as the ones lining the pathway to the workshop. If we do complete the game and like start New Game Plus, we can get an extra gravestone right here with the doll praying to it at the very beginning of the game, which could just show like, hey, that was our hunt, and it's just kind of a reference to our own triumph, even if like we do kill the moon presence. It's just kind of a nice little Easter egg by the developers.
Welcome. What is it you desire? Very well, let me... Farewell, good hunter.
Now we get a note from Gehrman, which is a holy chalice is said to be enshrined in Old Yharnam, seated in the valley. And I don't think he's going to be back here. You don't even think great ones have blood in the traditional sense? I think they do. Maybe not like the traditional sense, but I think like great ones gained their own power from using the blood, or like the blood echoes, essentially. I think that idea is supported through how the highest levels of cold blood become called Great One Cold Blood. Even though like I don't necessarily think like it represents the biology of the organism that it came from. Like I don't think wherever we get Great One Cold Blood from means that it was a Great One that we got the blood from. It's just however many echoes in it gives it power that's equivalent or like on the level of Great Ones and kin and things like that. So things like Rom, which is a Great One, can still have kin cold blood, yet that doesn't necessarily mean she's only kin. She's still a Great One. What if the graves that you put the chalices in are graves of the hunters that raided the labyrinth, further emphasizing we're sort of reliving the dreams, memories of those hunters? I might definitely think that's an interpretation that could be argued favorably. Great ones have blood, but I think the blood isn't exclusive to them. Do you agree? It's the amount of blood. Yeah. So there's a note on this closed door. It says the town is long abandoned. Hunters not wanted here. There's a minor difference in Japanese, but it's not really important. It's just flavor, really.
You there? Hunter! Didn't you see the warning? Turn back at once. Old Yharnam, burned and abandoned by men, is now home only to beasts. They are of no harm to those above. Turn back, or the hunter will face the hunt.
So Jura's up there. He's the guy who is giving us that warning. And as soon as we enter Old Yharnam, we see more crucified beast patients. Looking up close, we can see they are completely covered in fur. They have 5 fingers. I believe they still have 5 toes. They're covered in fur. They got like bandages over their faces and more teeth that resemble like those of a canine or a stereotypical werewolf. And there's a smoke covering the area, so it's supposed to show that like Old Yharnam was burned. Some more shards. That item we'll get later, it's not too important. And then this area supposed to make us a little bit off guard by just having that enemy very obvious in the open. But if we go around the corner, there's actually another one waiting for us to step out. They are covered with cloth, but these are all beast patients. They differ from scourge beasts in that they're like more humanoid. These are the beasts that very obviously have a deathly fear of flame, and to just kind of reinforce that, we get the Hunter's Torch, which is essentially the same as the torch, but it has a little bit better scaling, a little bit better base damage. The description is pretty straightforward as well. It says, a torch formed by wrapping a pine resin-drenched cloth around the end of a long stick, once used in Old Yharnam. Designed to incinerate beasts and victims touched by the scourge, its fire damage is highly effective against beasts. So I'm going to pull out the torch just to kind of show us later. We can't really do too much right now. This is a shortcut area that's of course closed to us from this side in typical FromSoft fashion. And Herbert thinks it's more like the potency of the blood since it becomes thicker as it goes up in rank. Soda thinks Jura's a badass motherfucker. I don't disagree, unless you knock him off a cliff. Yeah, I don't know if you were in a chat when we talked about it a little bit earlier, Herbert, but I was mentioning that like the blood doesn't literally get thicker as it goes up in potency. It's more like it becomes more rich or dense with cold blood. It's a little bit splitting hairs, I know, but just want to reinforce that. But I do agree with like the principle behind what you said. So you see them starting to like cower from the torch. The fire doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. It kind of scales with arcane, and I haven't invested into that. And the weapon's completely unupgraded. But it does a decent amount of thrust damage, so it can be used to like do decent damage to things like brain suckers later on. Some cold blood dew, and more blood vials. Hello, dense, thick seems more or less the same to me. The reason why I bring that up is because some people think like it means thick in a more literal sense, like wider, and I just bring that up to kind of clarify. Like I wasn't necessarily disagreeing with what you said. I just want to be clear for the sake of the stream and the analyses that we're doing. Oh no, these guys are from the New Sunlight. Yeah, Herbert's a really good lore analyst. He's been doing this a lot longer than I have.
You are a skilled hunter, adept, merciless, half-cut with blood, as the best hunters are.
And half-cut is just kind of a idiomatic phrase which means drunk. Yeah, Herbert's a really smart guy. I enjoy our discussions about the lore quite a bit. And Jura begins to fire a damn Gatling gun at us. So we have to make use of the environment to kind of avoid those as we're going along. And this beast has red eyes, which shows that it has more poison in it. There might be something a bit more to having red eyes that's never really fully explained mechanically. It's just kind of something we have to piece together. It's something present within like all the Soulsborne games. Could just be having like intense emotions, but with Bloodborne more specifically, like red eyes are a sign of having like more poisonous blood. Bloodborne is pretty bad, so I haven't ever bothered to go into the Discord. Yeah, you're super. Well, we've been talking a little bit more about the some Bloodborne stuff in the New Sunlight. Like not a whole lot, but enough. Yeah. So despite Jura saying that he like wants to stop us from hunting beasts, that doesn't necessarily stop him from accidentally murdering the shit out of all these beasts with his Gatling gun and causing oil urns to ignite, which is definitely what happened in this other room. It's a very crafty noob trap, because while most people are going to be focusing on like the line of fire with the bullets, they don't necessarily realize that these urns are filled with oil and will explode. Of course, we get some more antidotes, just kind of reinforcing how important they are in this area. We got some guys hiding behind us, chilling out, waiting to catch us unaware. I do like how the buildings here are like boarded up and a little bit more run down. Like you can walk inside them and like grass and stuff's coming out of the ground. Although like the environmental lore of Old Yharnam is a bit contentious. Like some people don't think it really burned down, despite like every description saying it did, because it doesn't look super burnt down. Which I don't know, it's a little bit silly, but what are you gonna do? You either disagree with the items and then throw out all the lore that can go with it, or just take it as it is and say okay. The Bloodborne subreddit is honestly the worst of the Soulsborne subreddits, just because it has BSB cured my depression or whatever. You think typical Bloodborne discussion is closer to the floor, so you either get really dumb discussion, really pretentious discussion on the Reddit. Oh yeah, I can see where both of you are coming from with that. I use it occasionally just to like get some of my ideas out there. No harm comes from it, although it definitely does leave a lot to be desired in terms of like some analyses or Oh no. Of course, there's like a lot of regurgitation of like what's discussed in Vati videos on the topic, which are essentially taken from Redgrave's The Pale Blood Hunt, that I have disagreements with. But I mean, if people don't know, they don't know. It's the thing about like studying lore is you can't tell what's good lore from bad lore until you already know the lore. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. So comparing shit to diarrhea when it comes to From Software subreddits. A lot of the lore also comes from people being objectively wrong. Yes. Like whenever someone talks about the Bloody Crow Canehurst. Yeah. I mean, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. People make stuff up or assume things came from somewhere because they heard it from someone, but they didn't necessarily like check their sources. Does get a bit tiring, like trying to correct people or be active when it's not always productive. So I don't really use it a whole lot other than just like trying to get some visibility for some ideas I've had at times. Oh shit, he got aggro pretty early. So whatever, that's a Jura's like helper, attendant. Ow. He is really super aggro on me. That's interesting. Like I normally see his aggro or his AI break on these steps. I'm not gonna deal with him now, just because. Well, maybe I should, but yeah, fuck it. He wants to fight. The thing is, if we like come back later with Jura, it becomes a bit more of a pain in the ass. That's late. To deal with him, because if you kill like any beasts, it'll make Jura become more aggressive again. I PvP a lot. It's obvious, huh? Alright. This is like the easiest way to cheese strat like a lot of the hunter encounters. You just R1 spam until you run out of stamina. Then you just shoot your gun until you gain some of it. From him we get Bone Marrow Ash. Probably not like a whole lot of relevance to that item possession, but it's different, so we'll examine it. Did I miss it? Okay. Bone Marrow Ash. Additional medium that strengthens Quicksilver bullets. According to the workshop, this is a special Bone Marrow Ash collected from the Hemwick Charnel Lane, which is an area we'll visit later on in the game. Invaluable to hunters with weak blood tinge who require the use of stronger firearms. One of the interesting aspects of this is like, or at least was used as something of a combustible in real life before the technology became more advanced. So using bone marrow is a way to make like firearms stronger even in real life, although it's not something we use anymore. So you guys are a little bit active on the chat. Let's see. Redgrave stuff is abject fanfiction at certain points and he doesn't try to differentiate it. Yeah, that's like my biggest issue with a lot of Redgrave stuff. Like, I don't necessarily care if he has headcanon. It's just that he doesn't do the best of jobs differentiating when he's conjecturing versus like actually reading what's in the game. And he doesn't use many visual or textual references, which is a personal gripe of mine. Herb thinks that JSF actually had a way more harmful influence at this point. Oh, really? I don't necessarily think that's true. I think like Redgrave's influence is larger, but I feel like maybe for more active lore enthusiasts that might be more true. But I feel like for like most people, the Redgrave interpretation is the most prominent. Soda thinks, or Soda has yet to get into JSF stuff. He's listened to him on BFSC, and he's seemed pretty cool. Rubito thinks that Herb's videos have made him more interested in Bloodborne. That's nice. So you'll try to talk about it a bit more? Oh no, you found my videos, my secret shame. I mean, they're really not bad videos. I enjoy them, even if they are more like thought experiments. I definitely appreciate the thought that went into some of them. It definitely made me rethink some things, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything. So I appreciated them for like stimulation, if nothing else. Soda believes, or mostly listen to Aegon stuff in terms of long form Bloodborne stuff. If it serves as a gateway into Bloodborne, then it can only be a good thing. Yeah, I agree. He liked how to the point that were. What's wrong with JSF? The bone marrow ash symbolizes he's a powder keg. Not entirely. Like, powder kegs, while they do use explosives, like, the item does say that it is directly related to Hemwick Charnel Lane. If you get into the game yourself, you can tell that Redgrave's content is pretty objectionable. True. But with JSF, he misrepresents the cut content and encourages you not to engage with the game because it's not finished. I agree. It's a bad precedent to set cut content isn't canon. I think that's arguable. I think you can look at some of the cut content and come to conclusions that's not normally available. But I do agree that it should definitely be taken with a grain of salt and not treated as gospel. If anything, it's just good to see like the motivations some of the developers had at certain times in the game's development. Do you agree JSF is worse for the high-level lore people and Redgrave is worse for the low-level lore people? Yeah. Ruby was once called closed-minded for saying cut content isn't canon. Well, were they wrong though? Turning around, I could have gone up that tower to where Jura was, but we can get him as a kind of pseudo-ally later on, so I don't really feel the need to go up there because he'll just be aggro on us. I guess we could have looked at like the rest of Old Yharnam from up there, but that's something we can also do much later. This right here is not the Church of the Good Chalice. This is a separate church. I think the two are related. I mean, they're both in Old Yharnam. They're both gigantic churches of somewhat similar layout and probably similar size. So they may have been like twin churches or chapels. This should be more understood as likely having been a healing church institution because we've got a lot of the beast patients down here. This ambient noise that we've got going on is a kind of like chiming or chanting done by the denizens of this chapel, the beast patients themselves. It's unclear if this is like actually a prayer, but it does seem fairly organized, all things considered. Like, it's not completely mindless like one would initially expect with a scourge beast or a werewolf. Like, there does seem to be a purpose for it, even if it's not exactly obvious what it is. Not sure how well we can see it, but right below us is another crucified scourge beast, although it's not on a crucifix. It's kind of like on a wheel or chandelier looking like thing. It's gigantic. It resembles... I guess this angle is not very good. It looks like the blood-starved beast, which we'll save later, or see later. It has the skin on its back has been self-flagellated, according to like the internal name, because it was trying to drink its own blood, and it could be that the beast patients down there were trying to drink up and soak up the blood from that crucified beast for themselves, for the high that it would give them. And now having like hit that oil urn that to cause that fire, we don't really hear the chanting anymore. And if we were to come in through the front of the building and get seen by one of the scourge beasts, it would let out a ghastly scream, which would alert all the others to our presence, and it would also stop them from their chanting and their relatively inactive activities. Looking at chat. Gascoigne saying Umbasa doesn't mean Demon Souls is Bloodborne. Citation needed. You can light the BSB corpse, yeah. Just whack the thing in the corner, it's super cool. Whack with the torch. No, you can just use anything, really. You can't, unfortunately, roll from up here to over there where there's an item in the distance. But you can just drop down onto this little platform below. And you can hear them screaming, which I was talking about a little bit ago. So, grab this item, Molotov cocktail, which could be some more environmental lore storytelling, like they were using Molotov cocktails against all these beasts. Alright, got it on the first try. This jump over here has to be done with like the circle tapping jump. And we get our first like cosmetic item for the messengers. The Bloody Messenger Head Bandage. It's an accessory adored by naive messengers imitating the bandages of scourge victims unaware of their meaning. The spatters of blood give it a particularly nice touch. The inhabitants of the stump appear to have an interest in adornment. Why not let them be happy and revel as babes? I do like the final line. It stays true to the intent of the original, but it kind of has a whimsical quality to it that I appreciate. I don't really remember if there are any particular differences in this description from the Japanese, or just like within the messenger items in general. I think it was pretty straightforward. I suppose the Japanese makes it sound a bit more active. It says it's an ornament of the messenger's misunderstanding. It's something which mimics the bandaged forms of those afflicted by the scourge of beasts, and they were so thorough as to even apply blood to it. So like rather than just saying like the blood is a nice touch, which could just mean like they found something that was bloodied, it's more like explicit that they themselves put blood on it because they don't understand like how much pain came with it. You've talked to many people who obviously know the game well, but they've been convinced it's a waste of time to try to piece it together. Yeah, I think that's an unfortunate aspect of just Bloodborne lore in general. I do blame some of that on like some of the descriptions with using the term Eldritch specifically. I don't think it's a terrible translation like as far as like literal meaning goes. I just think it has the unfortunate implication of encouraging people to stop short and just understanding things as being Lovecraftian in nature and therefore inherently not able to be known, and it just kind of kills a lot of analysis into things, in my opinion. Like the amygdala used to be the final boss. That was an idea that JSF had, but doesn't have any evidence whatsoever to support it. Like even in the Project Beast trailer, you see the amygdala statues lining the Grand Cathedral, which shows like way more than one. So he just kind of took that idea from it being the false god, as Herbert's pointing out. But yeah, there's absolutely nothing to support that from what I've seen and from what I've heard from Lance. It's a little bit unfortunate that he's gone with like such a passionate misreading, I would argue, of cut content. I mean, I don't like wish ill will or anything towards him. I just feel a little bit sad that he doesn't really seem to appreciate like what we do have, I think, as much as could be done. And of course, these guys have red eyes, and just that one hit was almost enough to poison me. And this is a bigger Scourge, or Beast Patient. I think, like in my head canon, I consider like these large ones to be female, just because it seems like women in this franchise seem to have more intimate connections to the supernatural and transforming into grotesque things. Like Vicar Amelia is one of the largest transformations. I think the Cleric Beast is a woman, even if there's like really nothing to truly confirm that. It's just kind of headcanon that makes sense to me. All the relationships with Ariana, Queen Yharnam, Queen Annalise, Adela, all of the Blood Saints are female. If you kind of exclude Lawrence as like the source of it, but yeah, it's just something I tend to believe. Sinclair's server seems particularly rife with people who think the game itself. Amy is a collection of beings. Why would it be? Never mind. Aren't the larger ones referred to as females anyway? No, not necessarily. Like, Amy is more of a fan name because Amygdala, AMY. But I don't necessarily think that means that they can't be female. So we get blood, or ritual blood, from this, like, altar here. I've always been interested in what's on it, but I haven't been able to find out exactly what these engravings are. It almost looks like the assets are a bit messed up, but it might be intended just as like having been like partially destroyed. I also like to look at like the little gold figures up here. Haven't figured out what those are yet either, but it's something that I am trying to like keep an open mind about. Like this one looks like a figure like almost holding something. This one's a little bit clearer. Maybe the other ones are the same. But so ritual blood is enshrined as like a kind of holy relic. So it's worth examining after we get rid of some of these screamers. Oh, don't have the HUD on. Where is the ritual material? Okay. Ritual Blood 1, and this of course shows that it's part of a progression of items. Material used in a Holy Chalice ritual. One of the basic ingredients used to satiate a Holy Chalice is this incoagulable blood. When all is melted in blood, all is reborn. So this line about it being incoagulable blood is one of the reasons why I believe it's tied to cold blood, which is blood that does not clot in dead bodies. It's why it's blood when it's cold as opposed to like a scab or anything like that. When we get the higher levels of ritual blood, we'll see like the skulls of the dead popping out of it, which I think are analogous to what we can find with certain items like the Executioner's gloves and spells relating to the dead in general. You remember when Herb baited the new Sunlight by asking if people thought Bloodborne was misogynistic? Yeah, that was pretty funny. You mean the Beast Patients? You think they're all referred to as females? I don't remember if there's anything that refers to the Beast Patients specifically. Ritual blood being there indicates to you it might be a form of treatment. Yeah, I agree. I think like ritual blood is old blood, or as Gehrman said, like what they imbibed from chalices. It's what hunters partake communion from. So old blood is ritual blood, which is the same as cold blood. I think it's all the same thing, but just called different names. Like so, we can say like tissues are Kleenex, but that's just kind of like metonym for it, which means like Kleenex is what we tend to call all forms of tissues, even though there are different types of brands and things like that. I think that's what Old Blood is. And so, for another example, like if we have a piece of fabric or cloth, we can call it a cloth, a fabric, a towel, handkerchief, scarf, whatever. It's all essentially like the textile, but they're given different names according to their function. So I think Old Blood used in like the chalice rituals is called ritual blood. Old Blood found on bodies directly is cold blood, and like the Old Blood within transfusion fluid is just what we use for blood vials and things like that, if that makes sense. Herb doesn't remember the misogynism or misogynistic question. That was funny. It really was. I could tell you must have been pretty bored that day, because you don't typically like to stir the pot that much, I don't think. Or like, you do it seldomly, but I think it was just like in relation to what someone else is going on about that day. And so you were just kind of baiting them. Bloodborne is ironically the most pro-women game. Yeah. Maybe. I could definitely see that. Except for the fact that we murder all of them. Or they go crazy and we blame it on their periods and shit like that. Me as a feminist icon. I think that is, like, unironically true to a certain extent. I should equip the antidotes before I forget. We already got 10 of them just from like what's been lying around the town. Yeah, I got that stuff, didn't I? Yeah, I did. It's really easy to forget what you've literally just done while streaming. Although now that I think about it, it's probably true even without streaming. It's just a little bit more obvious. I think in terms of how he writes women, me and From Software as a whole are pretty good at female representation. It's arguable, I think, depending on like how you choose to interpret that. I don't necessarily disagree by any means. At least in terms of pushing females is more than just a pair of tits when it comes to fantasy. True, and especially like for a country like Japan where... do I even really need to say anything about that? Yeah. He's definitely more progressive despite being pretty... I won't say like unsympathetic, so to speak, but more of like an equal opportunity offender. He doesn't really treat them as differently. So even though like he'll put them on pedestals and stuff like that, like I think that's more of just him representing what he sees as like an aspect of some parts of society. So we got like Egon and the Knights of Kareem, like white knighting. They're firekeepers or maidens and stuff like that. But there's definitely a lot of powerful women in the From Software games. What am I missing? Oh yeah. Yeah, it's in Miyazaki, there's just a pair of feet instead. This isn't Tarantino. I do think there is like a little bit of a difference between them. So, as we go further into Old Yharnam, we see more heavy smoke. Nothing in particular, just kind of showing off that the area is still burning somehow, even if like the events that transpired here happened much earlier in the future. That's like one of the harder things to reconcile when looking at Bloodborne lore, is trying to piece together what happened when. Like, realistically, buildings should not stay on fire for like over a week. Depends like on the whatever the hell they're made out of, but it would almost seem as though like the events of Old Yharnam happened extremely recently, but it's very unclear when it happened, like considering how much time must have elapsed. Oh shit, I aggroed both of them. No? They were just looking at me menacingly. I know, maybe I did. It's nice finally having the cane upgraded enough to kill with a full stamina bar. That R1 spam stun locking. Pro play right there. Egon and Kareem as a whole seem to be a good play on how knights in fantasy blindly worship maidens. Yeah, for sure. Even if what they're leading them to doesn't or isn't even good, like being a firekeeper. Well, even if what they're leading them to do isn't even good, like being a firekeeper, which sucks, and leading someone to be a firekeeper is a bad thing. Unironically, old Yharnam was never burned. Do you want to fight? Make such wild claims and accusations going against every item description relating to Old Yharnam. So, I like that you can see this little scourge beast chilling, climbing up on the like cages, or I don't know what to call them. Just chilling. Doesn't really activate. You see this item because you don't see him, and then come out and suddenly get ambushed. Very good jump scares. One of the reasons why I also like it is it does help explain like the jump scare that happens in the upper Cathedral ward later on. We got some beast blood pellets. And one of the more interesting environmental things in Old Yharnam is how many bodies are suspended from the buildings. This is something which we can see like even in the beginning of this area. One thing which fascinates me is like this little cloth at like tied around their hands. It almost makes me think like these guys' wrists were cut, and these cloth bags might be collecting whatever blood sinks to the bottom of this person. There's kind of like a I don't know what to call it, like a motif or a theme of sinking and like things festering and stagnating, and I think that's kind of a representation of that. And that the figure of the Hanged Man also resembles what we get on the Hunter's Rune. So it could just be like this shape alone might allow for like more supernatural things to occur. Because when we go into the Cathedral ward later and fight like the church servants that wield the crucifixes, they can inflict frenzy despite like it just essentially being a crucifix, although it's more in the shape of the Hunter's Mark. Of course, I'm not sure if that interpretation is valid, but it's something which fascinates me in general. You think Gilbert says as much when he never used the flame sprayer and how the town literally doesn't look burned? Well, I mean, there's a lot of fire still going on, some environmental damage. Like, I feel like if From had more time to develop the game, it could have looked better. And it's always going to be the game, or the game of the question of what if, which is one reason why I'm not like too upset about not having Elden Ring news or having to wait for it, because I feel like to some extent every FromSoft game has been rushed, and it's left a little bit of a I can't think of the word in English, like not necessarily like regret, but like you wish there could have been more. Like you wish they could have fulfilled their own potential. Like you see what's already in the games, but Elden, what? Like you already see what potential's in the game, but it's just not quite fully realized, and so like you get like that little sense of regret that they didn't fully get to like flesh out their vision, and I feel like a lot of Bloodborne suffers from that, even though it's still like one of the best games I've ever played. Um, yeah, I think they could have like improved on certain things, even if like they aren't like full on improvements. It's just they could have polished things a little bit more. Yeah, so this Scourge Beast also has red eyes. I don't fully know its mechanics. I've heard that like the one that screams in the like fog over there will buff it. I'm not entirely sure if that's true or not. I haven't really extensively play tested that to confirm it. One thing that's interesting though is when you do strike this beast, just being in close proximity is enough to begin to build the poison meter. Like I didn't take any hits, but you may have seen that my poison meter was rising throughout that fight. He also had a larger pool of health. Like I didn't kill him in the 6 R1 spam that I was killing off the other Scourge Beasts with. Get some more Quicksilver bullets. So it is canon denying now. What, did they sell you a bad printer or something? A bad camera? Is that why you hate Canon? His final form is Bats. 5 years later, this game still holds up. So much lore. I agree. Thank you for stopping in, Timmy. Hope you enjoy yourself. You're generally happy they're taking their time. Yeah. There's some fire paper on the top of the tower. Thank you. Imagine Bloodborne was developed as long as Cyberpunk. Yeah. Honestly, like even though like there's like a little bit of a regret, I still can't think of the right word for it, but sadness about it. Like I do appreciate like them being able to get these games out and into the market, into the hands of the players, like allows them to continue making games. It's I think like the most important thing. So this is one of the like ways we can summon NPCs in the game. If we look at them, we can see the messengers are actually holding an old hunter bell. Alfred is one of the original summonable NPCs. In the unpatched version of the game, you don't use the old hunter's bell to summon him, you use the beckoning bell. He doesn't have like a HUD or anything that comes with it, so they did include some like quality of life improvements with the patches as the game went along. So he's like one of the few NPC summons that I consider to be somewhat canon to the game. Like I don't necessarily think like the hunter had to have summoned Alfred to help them kill the blood-starved beast, or even if the hunter did deal with the blood-starved beast. I suppose it doesn't really matter since there's not like a sequel or anything yet. But between him and I believe Gascoigne was also summonable in the base game, I give them more credence to the lore than the ones added with the Old Hunters DLC, just because they know it's a pretty silly system, because like if you consider the DLC to be canon, why not like the NPCs that they summon? But I just don't think that they necessarily have the same level of foresight that went into including Gascoigne and Alfred. But I don't necessarily have people disagreeing with me and like believing in the placements of the other NPCs. I just personally don't care for it very much. No, I purposely didn't go for the Rifle Spear and the Charred Hunter set, but thank you for reminding me. Soda. Remorse. Yeah, I think that's probably it. Um, maybe I don't know. Feels like remorse is something more of my fault as opposed to what just couldn't come to be. Herb thinks if Bloodborne can be said to have an issue with how it depicts women, it would be owed to giving women a special spiritual role, linking it to their sexual and reproductive capacity, and then legitimizing strict control of their behavior by depicting the non-controlled women as ridiculously corrupt. A late reply. No, 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 that's fine. I agree with you. Like, um, it's kind of easy to gloss over like whether or not women are. Maybe I should go level up first. Just fuck it. Deal with it. If I fail, I'll just bolt hunter. I think like women is their representation is a little bit hard to talk about because you can look at their positive portrayals as being negative. So it's a little bit hard to approach that sometimes. Like a place of veneration is also like a place of captivity, you know? I suppose I could have used like the pungent blood cocktails as well. Felt like I was a little bit late on that dodge, but luckily its tracking missed. I feel like in and to the left is the cheat code to a lot of like Bloodborne boss encounters. Watch me like die for just being so cocky right now. Phase 3, it starts to gain a poisonous aura from the blood spitting out of it. Getting hit at this point of the fight is pretty disastrous because just in addition to its ambient poison effect, it does a lot of damage. And at this point in the game, the health pools are still pretty small and hard to recover from. Like, I've seen people beat the cleric, or the blood-starved beast, but literally die to the poison buildup from beating it because they didn't notice and they were so low on health. Through Chalice. So yeah, this blood-starved beast. The internal name for it is the like a self-flagellated beast, which I think is really cool idea that doesn't get transferred into like the retail version of the game. You just kind of have to like figure it out for yourself or look at supplementary material. In Japanese, it's like I don't remember, like Chino Kawaita Kemono, which is like a Kawaita could just be like the way that it's written means it is bloodthirsty, like literally thirsty, but it's also a homophone which could mean like blood dried, which I like to think about in conjunction with the way that it's presented. Like it's bloodthirsty because its blood has been dried from it, like it drank its own blood and it's run dry. I'm not entirely sure if that's intended, but even if it's not, it's kind of a nice little play on words, which the Japanese is pretty big on. They use a lot of play on words in the FromSoft games in general, so it's kind of fun to see how those can work in conjunction with their storytelling. Yet, there's really not a whole lot. She wields the Kirk hammer, the repeating pistol, which we get from the Saw Hunter badge. Some people like to think she's either related to the Cleric Beast or is the Cleric Beast. I don't dislike that reading at all. I don't necessarily think it's canon, though. I think it's a really good head canon for sure. I really enjoy it, but not much else that can be said about that, really. If you imagine Elden Ring as Bloodborne 2 Incognito, don't you mean Electric Boogaloo? Mostly because they're equal opportunity in how they depict people of their respective sexes, not necessarily because they're inherently progressive. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, in a certain way, it's progressive because it doesn't treat them as being like treating women as being on a pedestal. But of course, by not treating them separately and like putting them on a pedestal and allowing them to be attacked, it could be seen as somewhat regressive by the same token. So it's a very interesting line to walk when like discussing that kind of topic in relation to like the FromSoft games. But I do think it's definitely worth exploring more and considering more seriously. So on the like altar within the Church of the Good Chalice, we've got some figures engraved onto the front over what appears to be a skeleton, and my thought is like this is representative of Lawrence and like the healing church in general. We've got 3 women surrounding the same kind of corpse rather, looking up to the sky, and we don't really have anything truly above them, but I feel like this iconography can be compared to what we see in the Grand Cathedral, and what comes from above could literally be the moon, or it could just be the idea of a deity of blood or something in general. This comes back to like the opening cutscene of the game where like the skull of Lawrence has the figure of like the woman carrying an urn over him, and you see a little bit of liquid drop from that urn if you look very closely at and pay attention to it. So the idea would be like the blood itself is a source that comes from the divine, like from heaven, from above, and they see Lawrence as like their figure, like their essential Messiah, as having been like bestowed that blessing from the heavens, and so it's a loss, but with him gone, they can only like look above and turn towards that divine figure for guidance. Not progressive in the way that actually matters. Debatable. All progress is progress, even if it's incremental. Soulsborne can definitely normalize women doing normal things in games. True. Although that's a Nita Sarkeesian take. Henriette is the hunter corpse with a top hat we find outside of Erden. Ooh, bold claims. Citation needed. So aside from that, like a big pillar, we've got, or big altar, we've got some of these interesting ones on the side. Shows like little, almost pig-like depictions of bearded men and long noses. I wish there was more in the final game that we could tie this to. The only thing we really have are like some cut content enemies. It was like one of the original mascots for the Project Beast phase of the game development. It's like you can see it in I think Santa DSK has some of the enemies restored in their videos where it's like you can see them. They wield halberds in the chalices, and they're just kind of like goofy in the way that they're animated. They look more cartoonish rather than like anything we'd really encounter within Bloodborne. This figure is a little bit different, but I think it's supposed to still be representative of the other one over there. Perhaps the more man-like form of that man, who's transforming into like one of the fatter, kind of chubby, pig-like beasts. The bandages are unraveling from it. I don't entirely know what that means. It could just be show that they're not being fettered by their illnesses and things like that. And this guy could just be in the middle of transformation. Like he looks like he's almost praying. He's got a humble, prostrated position. So something to consider. And of course, behind the altar, we get some more antidotes. A lot of people don't pick that up just because it's a little bit of a hectic fight. So rather than returning to the dream now, I think I might just go to the dark room within this area and get the chart set, just because everything's already cleared out. Did pretty well to clear the blood-starved beast on the first try. Nobody else wears the top hat in the game except her and Gehrman. Looks like the blood-starved beast. Yeah. And I don't mind the back seating at all. So I appreciate you pointing out if I've forgotten things, whether I intended to do it and didn't say, or if I really forgot. It's pretty easy to forget and get lost on trains of thought. You always kill BSB first try, or it takes you 50 tries. Yeah. That's how I am with like the cleric beasts. For some reason, like whenever I use the cane, it always gives me trouble. One thing I did forget to examine is some of the like statues that we see throughout Old Yharnam, which are very fascinating to me. I don't necessarily know if like what they depict is really representative of like some of the concepts in the retail version of the game, the final version, or if like these were some ideas that were tied to what may have been in earlier builds that just didn't get fully realized throughout the course of development. So we've got these things over here which are pretty similar to some of the statues of messengers we'll see in other parts of the game, and we've also got more bird-like representations of them. Before Ruby brings up Velka, I don't necessarily think they're connected to Velka despite looking like crows. And on this church itself we have a sigil of a kind of griffin, and we'll see a statue of a griffin when we first enter Old Yharnam. And then of course we've got like the praying women again. And there's not too much going on over here. There's a statue of a man on a lot of the surfaces of the buildings in this area. And we get the repeated imagery of a woman like clutching her face. It just shows up a lot. I think it could be representative of like the moon presence, or like possibly the effects of the moon presence. We get the man again. It could potentially be Lawrence. It's given a place of pretty high reverence rather. And it appears in other places as well. Yeah, you're hoping you weren't backseating? Yeah, don't worry about it. Like, I'm obviously going into super deep spoiler territory for a lot of things. Oh, I think I did forget an item down there, but yeah. It's one of the slightly annoying things about Old Yharnam. Like, you have to go through multiple times to get some items which really aren't like too important, but just for the sake of completion, like, you always want to get what's shiny in your vision. This is like the Aldia tours without Velka. I don't exactly know what that means, to be honest. Did I get distracted? Oh yeah, I totally did. got a lot of echoes right now, so it'll be pretty funny if I like die to the beast inside the little hidden area, if I fall off the damn cliff because of the crows and Jira's Gatling gun. I've done it before. Super annoying. Being bad. Pebbles, of course. So yeah, more of those statues just kind of chained up. It's really curious who commissioned all these statues and just how many of them there are. Don't remember if I have to hop over. No, I think it's just a fall. Yeah. I'm gonna leave out the torch just because we got some of the beasts in here that are scared of it. Can you hear them stomping around already? Oh, the one behind it got me. Then some more come down the stairs. So it's really, really easy to get ambushed in here. And I think there's, yep, still more. Yep, didn't have enough stamina to thrust. Yeah, and so like 3 more just come out of the upper level. It's kind of a lot just for like a dark room, so it's really easy to let your guard down, especially if you're like trying to go for the items that are lying about. Quick pro tag: link everything to Odin at the cost of all your credibility. Did I win or did the stream cut out? So this body is pretty easy to miss because just in the blind spot you don't even see the shine of the item. So we get the rifle spear, and up here we get a lore note. Arguably one of the most important ones in the game in my opinion. The red moon hangs low and beasts rule the streets. Are left no other choice than to burn it all to cinders. So this note identifies that on that moonlit night in Old Yharnam, it was a red moon, and that it was hanging low and therefore close to Old Yharnam, which links together that the proximity and the appearance of the red moon is undeniably linked to the Scourge of the Beasts, because the outbreak became so severe they had no choice than to burn the town, even though people like Soda may disagree that it has been burned very thoroughly. And then this is where we get the Charred Hunter set, which is a very good set. And then this leads back to where we were. So before we go out there, let's examine the items. I think besides the Thumru Chalice, there's something I picked up but I forgot to read, despite saying I was going to read it. What was it? Not the rifle spear. I think I'm tripping. So it must have just been the chalice. So the Thumru Chalice is a ritual chalice found in the Church of the Good Chalice, obviously. Used in a ritual at the tomb altar in the Hunter's Dream to break the seal of the old underground labyrinth. Let the chalice reveal the tomb of the gods, let blood be the hunter's nourishment, and let ye partake in communion. Now again, like the last 2 paragraphs are verbatim the same line that Gehrman will speak. In the English version of the game, the two lines are separate just because, like, it does not sound natural whatsoever to say, like, let the chalice reveal the tomb of the gods, let blood be the hunter's nourishment, and let ye partake in communion. Like, it's way too stiff and too formal to convey in a one-to-one, like, shared quote. So that's why I believe they're different. It could also just be like whoever was translating just didn't have the context that the exact lines came up in a different location. So it's just what made sense within the context of written dialogue versus an item description. Soda's interpretation was that the church attempted to burn Old Yharnam but realized there's too many beasts to kill, so they just said fuck it and decided to leave the town to its own devices. I think that's more or less what happened after the fact, but I think burning it is part of why they abandoned it in the first place. And like, to be abandoned means like they called off their hunters, who would typically like control the beast hunt, so to speak. And so going back to the chalice description, like the idea of partaking in communion and drinking in blood is not just any blood, I would argue. It's the blood of the chalices, which we know to be ritual blood, since that's what opens the tomb of the gods. So that's what hunters take nourishment from, in my opinion. So yeah, that's one of the bigger pieces of lore that's really hard to pick up on, I think. And going to the charred set, we get... it doesn't have a head of its own, we just kind of like appropriate juras for it. So the Charred Hunter garb says it's one of the staple articles of hunter attire fashioned at the workshop. This means like it wasn't a healing church workshop, I believe. It's like Gehrman's workshop. It's a product of the scourge of beasts that once plagued Old Yharnam and culminated in the town's fiery cleansing. The cave's dampness makes it highly resistant to fire. Wearers of this attire hunted down as victims of the scourge who survived the raging flames and stench of singed blood. It's a pretty metal description. It's like, oh, you thought you got out of the fire? Well, meet the hunters who are waiting to clean everything up. The Charred Hunter gloves is pretty similar, just the last paragraph is different. It's designed to be highly resistant to fire. Wearers of this attire hunted down victims of the scourge beast who survived the raging flames and the stench of singed blood. The only difference, I suppose, is like the cape and just slight wording difference. Could just be a product of translating something at different times and not copying and pasting, although they did that with the trousers. Sounds like they sent the powder kegs in and they were the ones who discovered the town has to be burned and they saw it was so overtaken. Yeah, I agree with that. But just it just showed that they did abandon the town. Like, that decision was made. Oh shit, I forgot about Jura. Which is part of the reason like I wanted to do it later, but since we were doing pretty well. Damn it. I just kind of went with it. So that pretty much concludes all we can get from this area. I don't think I'm forgetting too much. Oh, the floating statue, but it's kind of more of a joke than anything related to lore. And the one item up there. They threw away the baby with the bathwater. Oh shit. I thought it would transport me back to the other one. Just because I hadn't gone to the dream with this one. It's okay. I'll just level up a lot, maybe get the emblem for later use. No more badges, so there's no like new items in the Insight Bath itself. Upgrade the weapon first. Gehrman's back. Oh yeah, I don't have any of the twins. So I should repair it. And see if any of the blood gems that I got were better.
The healing church and the blood ministers who belong to it were once guardians of the hunters in the times of the hunter Ludwig. They worked and forged weapons in their unique workshop. Today, most ministers don't recall the hunters, but they have much to offer you. And so, heed the message of your forebears. Ascend to Erden Chapel.
So that last line is I would argue it's definitely mistranslated. Rather than saying ascend to Erden Chapel, he should say ascend Erden Chapel. Like, that's where you go to get to the Healing Church workshop and progress through the back route into Cathedral Ward. So even though he isn't necessarily like, well, maybe he is. He's directing us to Vicar Amelia, but that doesn't necessarily mean like his goal is for us to kill Amelia. Of course, like if one ascribes to the idea like the Moon Presence is kind of a vengeful great one and trying to kill a lot of things, I mean he could be going with that role, but I think Gehrman doesn't exactly have a whole lot of direct knowledge of actually what's going on in the waking world. He's just kind of giving us advice. It's more of like a developer guide more than like supernatural, preternatural knowledge, in my opinion. I think the powder kegs were sent to burn the town, but then realized, hey, it's actually a bad idea. The church covered it up and said they burned it anyways. Note by the rifle spear indicates question of sorts, like, should we burn it? Oh shit, beasts are people, let's not do that. I do think there was a lot of, what's the word, not hesitation, but like contemplation or conflict in like coming to that decision. In Japanese, like, your gut instinct is right. Like, it's phrased as a question. He says like, it's already too late. Is there nothing to do but to burn everything? It might have been like a bit more of a rhetorical question, but it does show that like there was definite reluctance to go with that decision. I believe, at least.
Ascend to Erden Chapel. From there, you will find the church workshop.
The other thing Gehrman brings up in relation to Ludwig was that the Healing Church did have their own unique workshop from this workshop that we're in, like the representation of. So it does become a little bit harder to differentiate which faction was technically part of the Healing Church and which was part of this workshop versus another named workshop. One way to kind of like figure that out is within the storage option we can see workshop right-handed weapons, church right-handed weapons, etc. So there is some factional guidance given to us for certain items. Like the Foreigner set is set to other attire, so it doesn't fall under the church or any of the other workshops. But I don't necessarily think that this is all reliable, unfortunately. Like there's just I think a couple things that might be more limited to the DLC items. I don't truly remember off the top of my head as to where they all fit in. So like the flame sprayer. Oh, I forgot to read this. Is part of no, I read it, didn't I? Maybe I didn't. I feel so forgetful while streaming. It's a special weapon used by certain members of the Healing Church. It spits searing flames by using blood-imbued Quicksilver bullets as a special medium. Not the most efficient weapon by any stretch, but sometimes a sea of flame is just what the doctor ordered. Besides, the beasts of Yharnam can always use a good cleansing. So yeah, like this does set it up as the healing church weapon as well. And the torch is just a regular workshop, as well as the blunderbuss and the pistol. So it's just something to keep in mind if we ever do have more questions about what hunters belong to what faction. There is a little bit of guidance within the storage system. Ascending to Erden Chapel is defo mistranslated, but it's fun to think about, or to think that Gehrman just forgot the architecture of Yharnam, and he thinks Erden Chapel is on higher ground than it is. Gehrman directing us to the church workshop is really interesting, since the church workshop is the source on the dreams workshop as stated by the achievement. Yeah. I think if you wanted to be ridiculously charitable to the translation, you could just say he means ascend from the hunter's dream, but I don't really believe that. Yeah, it's probably just a mistranslation. Yeah, that's what I think. To be fair, like the dialogue could have been ascend to Erden Chapel in like an earlier version of the text, and it just wasn't revised and updated in the other
home, good
languages. That does become
what is it you desire?
An issue as we continue.
Very well, let me stand. Farewell, good hunter. May
I don't think she says anything
welcome
different.
home. What is over time? Countless hunters. The graves hears it all.
So it's been about 3 hours. I'll end the stream fairly soon. Before I do, I'll just look at some of the smaller things in Old Yharnam and the entrance to the Cathedral ward, and like pick up the wooden shield. Or I might just leave it. Forgot to show off that like the snatchers weren't in the front of the chapel to begin with. But I suppose just talking about it will be enough. Of course, like we can look at the skybox now. See, it's like still evening. Killing bosses does progress the time to some extent. Like if you kill Vicar Amelia straight away, like the NPCs near her house will still be normal. But if you kill more of the bosses, the mental state of the characters does degrade over time, even though they're indoors. So it does show like the effects of what's going on is something constant over the night. It's not just like all one scripted event. So yeah, that's a floating statue up there. I like to joke like when they got the reference art from reference photos of like the Notre Dame where like those statues are taken from, they just included it in the game even though it's very clearly a glitch. And so like I mentioned that there's like griffins on the sigil leading up to like the backside of the unnamed chapel down by the river where the crows were. And so like coming into Old Yharnam, we do see a few griffin statues that I don't think they appear in any other parts of the game. The idea of potential like women, like the female statues transforming from messengers into like birds does interest me, because I think it could be like compared to what we see with Murgo's wet nurse, or it could just be representation of transcending in general. So in other parts of Old Yharnam, we can see like these bird statues appear to be like pregnant. They'll get like bigger bellies and things like that. Oh, here's one right now actually. Oh no, this one doesn't have the belly, but it's almost like a messenger. It's got like almost like a bird-like face as well. So it almost shows like a middle ground between a messenger and this more avian statue over here. I don't think it truly has a whole lot of significance to the religion of the Healing Church, or maybe the native religion to Yharnam before there was a Healing Church. But it could just show like the idea of messengers being linked to an afterlife or like more angelic type creatures is something to consider. I don't believe there's anything else here, so we're going to go back to the Cathedral Ward. Ruby, speaking of door lore, this almost matches the one door shield in Dark Souls 2 or 3 it was. Too bad bro isn't here to see it. Door lore will be uncovered in Elden Ring, probably. Do you know, is said by some like that the phrase cellar door is the most beautiful phrase in the English language? I personally don't care for it that much, but like some authors took it to heart and they named like some of their countries like Celador, Celador.
You. Stay away from me. I know all your tricks.
Dweller probably doesn't say anything different either.
The hunter.
Oh, he does.
This here is a safe place, but next time you're out on a hunt, if you find
That's pretty much the
anything,
same. Whatever. We'll get some more NPCs a little bit later on. Eileen still isn't here yet because we haven't opened any of the gates to the Cathedral Ward itself. We get some more church servants over here with their pimp canes and their bells. Some crows. More statues and more like depictions of griffins. Church servant. Forget, can't stun lock these guys so well. So, going into Cathedral Ward is not possible to do so directly. You either need the Hunter Chief emblem from the gate on the other side of the plaza, or you need to come in through the back way through Erden Chapel, which is what we'll be doing. One point of interest is we get what looks to be part of the Canehurst Lion sigil on this house, even though there's no like direct connections, although I think maybe the numbing mist might be up there, although it might just be like up there. It's a sigil which will also appear in Ariana's house, which does tie her more closely to Canehurst, with some other contextual clues as well. This hooded figure in the back here does not normally spawn until the blood-starved beast has been killed. It's hard to come up with like a real reason as to why the blood-starved beast would have been like holding these guys at bay. But they'll hit extremely hard this early in the game. Oh fuck, I missed. And it's pretty easy, even though I just messed it up, to get a free visceral after you do like a little bit. Oh, shit, going to Yahar'gul. To get a visceral on them when they glow in their aura. But I screwed it up. I was a little bit off center. It's okay. Like going to Yahar'gul is probably something I would have examined a little bit before going through Erden Chapel and then the next stream anyway. It's a good transitioning point, even though I lost my echoes. And so I intend to do these streams from 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the next couple days, maybe until we finish this playthrough. I'm not sure if I'll continue streaming so much after that. Bloodborne lore streams might just be something I do on occasion to gather my thoughts as I go through the game and maybe work on some other Bloodborne related content. I do thank everyone who stopped by. If you enjoyed it, please follow the stream. I've got a Discord server now set up so I can give us announcements of when I'm going to go live, or if you want to talk about lore off stream, that's perfectly fine as well. So I think I'll end it for here, and I just want to thank everyone for stopping by. Have a good day.